Hi, welcome to Adjusting Your Heart. I'm Doc AJ Chua, and today we're going to talk about the world of the married. If you are a K-drama fan, I'm sure you know that this is the title of the highest rating K-drama in cable TV history. And you know why? That's because it struck a chord of what's really happening in society. So today, I'm going to talk about the kinds, the causes, and the effects of adultery, as well as I'm going to give you tips on how to prevent and deal with it. Some synonyms of adultery would be infidelity, having an affair, betrayal, cheating. So adultery is when a married person had sexual relations with someone other than his wife or her husband. And in Philippines, adultery only refers to a married woman sleeping with somebody else. And for a guy, it's called concubinage. But in most countries, the term adultery would apply to both sexes. So it's very sad that there are more and more cases of adultery and concubinage here in the Philippines. That's why I'd like to tell you what are the different kinds of adultery. There are three kinds. The first is what most of us would know, physical adultery. That's when someone sleeps with someone other than one spouse. Another is what we call emotional adultery, or what we call online affairs. This happens when there's an intimate and sexually stimulating chat sessions. They share pictures that are very intimate in nature. They don't physically sleep together, but they have that connection. And the things or the feelings that should have been reserved for one spouse, they gave it to somebody else. That's emotional adultery. Another kind of adultery is financial adultery. It means when someone spends money, incurs debt, borrows money, or keeps secret accounts or stashes of money, or they have some credit cards that the spouse doesn't know. That's financial adultery. And you know, in Orange County, USA, that's a ground for divorce. So those are the three kinds of adultery. But what are the causes? The most common causes would be this: loss of emotional intimacy. So throughout the course of marriage, the romance dwindles. And then another reason is the need for physical intimacy wasn't met. Or one gets disillusioned with one spouse. You think, I think I married the wrong person. Or sometimes it's midlife crisis, or the emptiness syndrome, wherein all of the children have already left home and they're left together, but they weren't able to nurture the relationship. So even though these are the common causes, it can be prevented. It's not an excuse to commit adultery. And what are the effects? The effects are devastating, because normally adultery would lead to broken homes, broken families. What's the effect on the spouse, especially on the spouse who was betrayed? At first, probably once the spouse found out, there will be denial. Oh no, my husband or my wife can't be cheating on me. And then the feelings of being betrayed, hurt, angry. Sometimes that spouse would think, what's wrong with me? Why would my partner do this to me? And they would try to do their best to win the spouse back. Sometimes, some people opt to confront the erring spouse. But there will be three possible scenarios. Once you confront that person might deny it. So you have to have proof. Or he or she would just deny it. Or that person might choose the third party, and that will be sad. Of course, we would want the third option, wherein upon confronting, that person would confess and would choose to work on the marriage. Some people would opt to confront the third party, but if you ask me, that's no use, because the problem is within the marriage and with your spouse. He or she couldn't have another third party in the future. Some people would ask a trusted friend to mediate for them, or some people choose just to leave that partner. What would be the effects on the children? Same. The children would feel hurt, feel betrayed, they will get angry, they lose respect towards the erring parent, they lose faith in marriage, they lose faith in the opposite sex. And sometimes they follow the example of the erring parent. If the dad or the mom is sleeping around, so when they get married, they would also follow suit. And that's sad. But some people choose the mature way. They say, I'm not going to do what my dad or my mom did because it hurt our family. So when I get married, I am going to be faithful to my partner. And I'm going to give you some tips on how to prevent adultery. My first tip would be to put God in the center of your relationship. Because if you look at the picture, once the husband and the wife grows closer to God, God being in the center, the gap between the two of them would grow smaller and smaller, which means lesser problem, lesser misunderstanding. There's no perfect marriage, even if God is in the center, because human beings are flawed. But with God in the picture, it is stronger. And of course, if your spouse, if both of you fear God, then let's say the temptation comes in. Because that person loves God and fears God, he or she wouldn't want to commit adultery because the Bible clearly teaches that adultery is sin. And another tip is to always put your spouse before your children. Because sometimes when people get married, they put the children first. They're always the needs of the children. The focus always on the kids, and they neglect their partner's needs. Let's not do that. One of the best gifts you can give your children is a strong marriage. Then they could see, ay, may forever pala. But what if you're already separated? Do not despair. If you're already separated, I hope in the future your marriage, would work out. But right now, what you can do is to be strong and take good care of your children. And for those who are still married, one of the tips would be to always maintain physical and emotional intimacy, which means you still have to go on dates. Of course, now it's so hard because of the lockdown, but you can still spend one-on-one time together wherein, the kids will be in their room, you two can talk, in the future, once the lockdown is over, once a week go out on a date, only with the two of you, celebrate anniversaries. These things can keep the emotional intimacy. And of course, the physical intimacy should also be taken care of. And focus on your spouse's positive qualities so that you would have less fights. Most of the time we pick fights because we notice something that we don't like about our spouse. But let's focus on their positive qualities instead of the negative ones. And be your spouse's best friend. Be the first to celebrate victories with them. And when they're down, be there for them. And my friends, please beware of innocent friendships. Actually, a lot of adultery didn't start in which the guy or the girl would say, I want to commit adultery. I want to cheat on my spouse. No, it started innocently. For instance, let's say it could be in an office setting, or in a, let's say, club setting, or even normal friendship. And then you started to develop emotional intimacy, like I open up about my problems with Hans, and then that guy started opening about his marriage, and then he would start comparing, how come Jeanette is understanding, unlike my wife who's the jealous type, the nagging type. Of course, he hasn't seen me in our house. I also have my flaws, and vice versa. What if I said, he's a more understanding guy than my husband? So it always starts with emotional intimacy. And then some of those, would also eventually end up in bed or physical intimacy. So I'm not saying that we cannot have friends of the opposite sex. Both Hans and I have friends of the opposite sex, but we set proper boundaries. Like there shouldn't be flirting, with opposite sex. You can't text somebody like, I miss you, somebody of the opposite sex. You can't say that. You can say that I love you. No, you can't say things like that. These are double meaning messages. And of course, we avoid touching the opposite sex. And one thing that can help is also wearing your wedding ring. because that would remind that you are married. And also in your cell phone, you can also put pictures of your family, your spouse, your kids, so that even when you go out of town on business trips, you would be reminded, I have a family. I should love them, and they also love me. And I hope that would keep you away from temptation. And I'm going to give some extra tips for the wives. For the wives, please respect your husband. Because if not, he will look for somebody who could make him feel like a man. Actually, that has been proven by surveys. A lot of women who are very accomplished in their career, okay, are very successful, but who tend to put their husband down, a big percentage of, we call them in Tagalog would be under the saya. A lot of them would have a mistress. Why? They would need somebody to boost their ego. And if you would look at the statistics, a lot of guys who have mistresses, these mistresses will be younger, would be less educated, would have less money than they have, because they would need somebody to make them feel like a man. So that's why if we as wives, we don't put our husband down, then they don't need to look for someone else. And please do not correct your husband in front of other people, or especially in front of your kids. Appreciate what he does for you. Thank him for working hard for your family. Sometimes, then you could also post in Facebook to show how proud you are of him. Support his dreams. And one thing we can do for him is also to be attractive for him. Okay? We always have to look pretty for our husband. And make your home your haven. It should be a safe place, a peaceful place. It's not a war zone. So that's why we try to minimize the fights and the conflicts at home. And now I'm going to give some tips for the husbands. I'm going to introduce you to a guy called Billy Graham. He's a very famous televangelist. And sad to say, he died 2018 at the age of 99. And you know what I admire about this person the most? It's because he has been faithful all throughout his 64 years of marriage to his wife, Ruth. And here are some of his secrets. He shared this in his book. He said that because he travels a lot because of his ministry. And he said one thing that keeps him from falling into temptation is that he avoids dining and traveling alone with the opposite sex. That's one of his principles in life. And he also has very good accountability partners, a group of close male friends who constantly would ask him, how's your marriage? Are you thinking of another woman beside your wife? Hard questions like that. And that kept him on the right path. So also for the guys, it's a bigger temptation for the guys than for most women is pornography. You have to avoid it because when you look at pornography, the women who are there, they're always very sexy, they're young. Then when you look at your wife, of course, as wives, we grow old. We would have white hair, we gain weight, we would get wrinkles. And sometimes, because if you're too much into pornography, then you won't be satisfied with your spouse's body. And please avoid functions, even if it's for business. If it's going to be held in a questionable place, like you know that there will be GROs there, do not go there. Temptations abound. So what do we do once, let's say, adultery already has happened? Actually, temporary separation can be considered. Let me clarify myself. I'm not advocating annulment or divorce. What I'm saying is temporary separation. Why? Because once the couple, okay, has temporarily separated, they're living in two separate houses, I hope that the erring partner, whether it's the husband or the wife, would start thinking how much he or she misses the spouse and the children, and realize that what he or she did was wrong. So of course, once the erring party wants to get back, there should be conditions. Like number one condition, you have to cut off ties with a third party. And then, of course, he or she has to confess to this, say sorry to the spouse, to the children, to God. And then he or she has also to agree to go for couples counseling. There's problem in the marriage. That's why third party was, it's easy for a third party to enter the relationship. So only then, when the marriage is better, then they can get back and stay in one roof again. So that's the goal of temporary separation. It's reconciliation. And my friends, it's not easy to gain back trust. So that's why I hope the tips I'm gonna share today are preventive. Yes, the betrayed spouse can forgive, but it takes time to build trust again. So if you are the erring spouse, you cannot get angry let's say once you're late, and then the betrayed spouse would ask, where did you come from? How come you didn't text? Are you seeing somebody else again? Because of the trauma of what happened in the past. And of course, you have to be honest now. You have to know each other's password. So if your wife or your husband would say, show me your phone, I want to see if you're texting somebody else other than me, then you have to. Okay? So because that builds trust. Can there be healing in families in which there's an adultery or infidelity? Yes, there is. There are countless stories wherein it happened, but by God's grace, the family is back together. But of course, that can only happen with God in the picture, and the erring party should truly repent. There should be true repentance. It means change. You know what? There's a story in the Bible, in John chapter 8, wherein there was an adulteress. And then they brought her to Jesus. And in the end, you know what Jesus told her? Neither do I condemn you. Go now and live your life of sin. Yeah, God can forgive. Your spouse can forgive. But it doesn't mean that you can continue on that wrong behavior. So, for the erring spouse, if you are the third party, same. God can forgive, but please do not do it again. And I pray that God can heal your family. And for those whose family are still intact, I hope that the tips I've shared can be preventive measures. Till next time.